She was declining in the ICU until her canine dog did the unthinkable. Snow erased Seattle's edges until the city felt unreal, but room 312 was mercilessly clear. A heart monitor exploded into sound. Green peaks jittered like saw teeth as Lily Harper's oxygen dove. Sarah Coleman flinched, coffee leaping from her cup, a comet across her coat. Then she was at the bedside, voice calm, hands faster than thought. "Bag her, draw gas. I want labs moving now." The ventilator thumped, the IV pump clicked, the room tightened. Behind the glass, James Harper didn't blink. Grease lived under his nails on clean days. Tonight it looked like grief. Rachel's palm was flat to the window, a pale print blooming in the cold. Grandma Ellen's lips moved without sound, rosary hidden in her fist. Snow hurled itself at the building, the ICU lights hummed like bees. Down in the buried parking lot, a German shepherd lunged against a truck window and howled. Max's sound wasn't wild, it was precise, repeating in a pattern that stung the spine. Ellen's head turned, eyes sharpening. "He hears her," she whispered to no one. The monitor shrieked again as if answering. Sarah's shoe slid in spilled coffee, steam braided with antiseptic. Lily's lashes trembled, a tiny rebellion. The nurse at the sink froze, listening. Outside, plows were stuck, sirens muffled, the world reduced to a rectangle of glass and breath. Sarah leaned close. "Lily, it's Sarah. Stay now." Another spike, another howl. The numbers wobbled, then plunged hard enough to suck the room empty. Something else was wrong. A label on a new vial didn't match the order. Rachel saw it first, tapped the glass, throat closing. James jerked toward the desk phone. Security lights flickered, like a shutter taking a picture. Max's howl changed key, a thin blade sliding under a door. What happened next will shock you. 8 months earlier, Lily Harper still rode her scooter in the cul-de-sac while Max shadowed the wheels like a quiet bodyguard. The first signs arrived as winter crept in. Aching joints, a faint rash under sleeves, fatigue that no nap could fix. Rachel, who once ran story hour at the library, built a notebook of fevers, dates, doses, and questions. James stretched garage shifts until midnight, chasing overtime and returning with hands that smelled of solvent even after soap. Ellen visited with soup and a gentler voice than usual, telling her granddaughter that storms pass, even the ones that start inside. Lily tried to keep up, smiling for everyone, though the stairs felt steeper and the world lost color around the edges. Specialists spoke like people crossing thin ice, vials lined up under bright lights, labels curling at the corners. An autoimmune storm, they said, a rare process turning her defenses against her own cells. Steroids lifted her for a week, then dropped her harder. School became packets and video calls. The scooter gathered dust. Max adjusted without being asked. He slept at her feet, woke when she stirred, brought socks to the bed, nudged a water glass toward her hand, and rested his head on her ribs to listen. Money went brittle. They sold the second car. Rachel let meals shrink so Lily would eat more. A neighbor left casseroles on the porch and texted only a heart. Ellen kept an index card in her Bible with careful lines of medication times. Through it all, Lily tried to be the kind of patient adults praise, polite, brave, cooperative. It fit like a costume that itched, yet she wore it because everyone looked relieved when she did. By late January, fevers came hot enough to warp thought. A cough scraped. The pediatrician frowned at the labs and referred them uptown. Snow threatened, clouds stacking like a blockade above the sound. They drove to Seattle Children's before dawn, windows white with frost and streets quiet. In admitting, the volunteer taped on a wristband, asked for the preferred name, and slid a pack of tissues across the counter that felt like surrender. An elevator opened to white corridors, polished floors, and framed drawings made by children who had learned patience the hard way. Room 312 held a bed that lifted and tilted, a chair that pretended to fold into sleep, and monitors that never rested. Dr. Sarah Coleman introduced herself without a clipboard barrier, eyes direct and voice steady. She outlined a plan with a speed that signaled urgency: stabilize, investigate, protect. Rachel nodded as if the motion could hold back panic. James signed forms, read them again, then signed copy. Lily watched the pulse line jump on the screen and tried to imagine it as a mountain trail she would climb when her legs remembered how. She asked about Matt. Sarah softened and said, therapy animals visit during daytime, but ICU policy bars pets, even trained ones, unless special approval is obtained. Max stayed at home that first night with Rachel's sweater in his bed, nose buried in the warm. He slept, then lurched awake, pacing the door, nails ticking out a message no one could translate. When the sweater shifted, he whined until someone put it back. Days acquired rituals that were not routines. Techs drew blood at 4. Nurses changed fluids at 6, 8, noon and the hours between. Rachel learned which alarms were drama and which were danger. James studied every face that entered. Ellen ate in the cafeteria to hide worry, then returned with peppermint tea and a story about young Sarah bringing home stray. A small trust grew, where there had only been fear. Outside, the storm gathered speed. Forecasts joked about 2 inches shutting the city, and then ran out of jokes as the radar turned white. Windows breathed frost at the corner. Volunteers hung paper hearts along the nurses' station, red loops bright against stainless steel. A donor dropped off pink cookies stamped with doves and a sign inviting people to take one for a friend. In a place where so much was withheld, the sugar felt like permission. Valentine's Day dawned inside the blizzard. Plows failed to clear the hills. The hospital settled into the hush of a place cut off but still running. Supply carts lined the walls. Schedules were reprinted to match the staff who made it through. Rachel braided Lily's hair and tucked a paper heart under the pillow with a promise about summer and a ferry ride. Lily smiled and asked for a cookie, eating half and saving half for later. Max rode with James to the garage because the driver could not bear to leave those eyes at home. Security shook their heads at the doors. Rules did not bend for weather or love. James left the dog in the cab with a blanket, the window cracked, and a bowl wedged in the footwell. Max watched every doorway as if one might deliver the scent that mattered. Only one person lived in his mind, and she was 2 floors above the snow. On the unit, Sarah reviewed overnight events. A fever spike at 2, a pressure dip at 3, a brief arrhythmia near 4 that settled after fluids. Imaging showed inflammation in places it should never visit. She proposed an adjustment, changing dosing and adding an antiviral to cover a possibility no one wanted to miss. Rachel weighed side effects against imagined relief. James rubbed the bridge of his nose, grease remembered by skin, though it had been scrubbed away. The halls smelled like chlorhexidine and coffee. Every surface reflected faces thinner than yesterday. A toddler in a beanie rolled past in a wagon pulled by a nurse with stickers on her badge. An older teen shuffled by with a pole and a determined father steered. Lily watched and tried to measure her own courage without turning it into a competition. She held the pink cookie, took a bite and said it tasted like a party that forgot its music. Ellen called it accurate. Afternoon arrived with the flat light of storm days, no true shadows, no honest blue. Nurses taped extra hearts, near room numbers. A tablet let Lily wave at classmates building a lopsided snowman. Rachel read aloud from an old favorite about a heroic collie, cadence gentle, a story chosen for hope, even though hope hurt more when it slipped. Ellen dozed, rosary slack in her fingers. James went down to give Max fresh water and came back smelling like cold air and engine heat. Max shifted in the truck, ears twitching toward a frequency no radio carried. He pressed his chest to the door and breathed fog up the glass, then settled with a sound that resembled an answer. Down the ramp, snow deepened against concrete like dunes. A guard walked his loop with a scarf high, boots leaving parentheses of wet on the tile between airlocks. The city shrank to a few lit rooms and the spaces between them. Evening gathered early. Streetlights dulled to halos behind curtains of white. A volunteer handed out small paper bags with chocolates and cards drawn by children from a school that had closed for the storm. Lily opened one, read a message in block letters, "You are brave like a mountain," and tried to feel like a rock instead of a river. James tucked the card into the notebook beside the bed. The seizure began without warning. First came a pause in her reply, a flicker behind her eye, then her hand jerked. The cookie fell. The monitor leapt from steady hum to shrill, the green line carving peaks none of them wanted to climb. Rachel said her name twice, then louder, then not at all. Ellen's chair scraped. A nurse hit the call bell and was already at the bedside when it sounded. Sarah rounded the corner and did not need the alarm to point the way. The hallway hearts brightened as if the decorations understood the term. In that instant, the family's months of sacrifice stood up in the room with the staff long shifts, skipped meals, sold belongings, and prayers said in private. The stakes that had lived in numbers and charts turned visible, heavy, and immediate. Outside, snow hammered the glass. Below, Max lifted his head and fixed on a direction no one down there could name. The alarm ripped across the unit before the overhead page finished the word code. Dr. Sarah Coleman reached room 3112 at a sprint, snapping on gloves while calling orders that braided the team into motion. Airway, oxygen, monitors, epi ready, draw gas. A respiratory therapist sealed the bag valve mask while a nurse tightened the cuff, and another hung a fresh bag. The monitor threw sawtooth peaks, oxygen slid, and the ventilator coughed. Sarah's voice stayed measured because the room needed a pulse to borrow. "We keep her here," she said, and the team moved closer, faster, calmer. Behind glass, Rachel pressed her hands to the pane until the skin blanched. James stood braced behind her, jaw locked, shoulders squared, as if posture itself might hold the room in place. Ellen leaned forward, rosary still, because silence sometimes works better than prayer. Outside, the blizzard battered the building. Flakes slapped the window like thrown rice that celebrated nothing. The corridor hummed with wheels and whispers, the thud of shoes that knew urgency without theatrics and the click of pens that turned panic into tasks. Losing tidal volume, the therapist said. Sarah nodded. "Neb is on standby, ultrasound at bedside." She glanced from waveform to lips, blue at the edges, then back to the IV pump. "Push now." Medication slid into the vein. Numbers steadied, trembled, listed again. She adjusted the seal, counted breaths, and let the team borrow her rhythm. Fear pounded at the door, found no handle, and waited in the hall like weather that refuses to leave. Down in the parking bay, Max slammed his shoulder against the truck door and howled. He had waited all morning with Rachel's sweater under his chin, nose full of Lily's particular scent, the one note the storm could not erase. The howl wasn't wild, it came measured in a pattern that climbed, held, released, then returned as if he were answering a metronome only he could hear. Snow stacked along the wipers like foam. He set his paws, lifted his head and kept time against the weather. Ellen's head turned the way a compass turns when magnet meets needle. She didn't hear pitch so much as feel intent. The sound braided with the alarm through glass and walls, a thread tugging at the hinge of her chest. "He knows," she said. Not loud, not tentative, simply sure. Rachel looked at her, then at James, then back to Sarah's steady hand. James stared at the elevator, as if willing it to confess a secret wrote to a rule that might bend. CO2 rising, a nurse called. Acidotic. A strip printer spat numbers that never belonged to a child. Sarah slid the ultrasound probe across Lily's chest, eyes narrowing at the grainy gray. No effusion. Lungs tight. Increase support by 2 points. Flush that line. Preet Labs. She kept one palm on the rail and the other moving because contact grounded her, and action could solve problems. "We pivot if this doesn't turn in two," she said, already planning the next four. Policy stood between doors wearing a badge and a tidy smile. It kept animals out because rules protect the vulnerable. Policy also missed the look on a grandmother's face when a dog's voice matched a heartbeat's stumble. The security officer at the desk stepped forward, palms. "No animals in the ICU," he recited, the sentence shaped by repetition. Rachel bit her lip until it blanched. James lifted a hand toward the elevator, then let it drop, torn between decency and instinct older than law. "Vasopressor to 5, Sarah said, eyes on the pressure line. "If no improvement, prepare to intubate." The team answered in a chorus of readbacks and tightened their circle. Sarah bent close so Lily could hear a human voice through the storm of equipment. "Not today, kiddo, not today." Max scraped the door seal, dropped to the mat, rose again and pressed his nose to the vent, hauling air as if scent could form a rope to pull. The howls softened into a cadence, each exhale deliberate, each pause exact. In the cab light his eyes reflected a question that was also a command. He pushed the sweater against the glass and resumed that strange breathing, sending it through steel and snow like Morse, a code that named one person and refused silence. Ellen stood. "James," she said, "bring him up." Her tone left no space for argument. "They will stop us," Rachel whispered. "They will try," Ellen answered. already moving. She dropped the rosary into Rachel's hand, not as a surrender but as a reminder. The officer reached out. She walked past without breaking stride, authority radiating from her posture rather than her paperwork. The lobby door moaned at a ice needled her cheeks. Max saw her and fell silent mid-breath, tail held like a question mark. She opened the truck, wrapped the sweater across his shoulders like a scarf and pointed. "Come." He leapt down, landed sure and matched her pace. Inside, the inner guard rose, startled. "Ma'am," he began. "Write the citation," Ellen said, jabbing the elevator button. "I will sign after." She breathes easier. The car arrived. She and the dog stepped in, a box of warm fur, old bones and purpose. Upstairs, Sarah called for the tube kit and meds, voice calm as a lighthouse in whiteout. The doors slid open to the unit. Ellen walked as if she belonged there, Max at heel, snow crystals flashing in his coat like sequins from a world that never knew fluorescent light. Heads turned. The nurse manager stepped forward, then stopped, looked from Rachel to Sarah, and chose to hold still. No approval, not denial, a stay. Ellen brought the dog to the glass. Max sat, ears forward, gaze welded to Lily, breath steady and exact. He didn't howl, he breathed. In, out. The cadence lined with the waveform's best stretches, smoothing jagged peaks as if the machine had a throat and the dog knew its lullaby. Rachel placed her hand on the window. On the other side, Sarah advanced the tube, confirmed placement and began controlled breath. The monitor answered with a rhythm that wasn't perfect but was possible. James exhaled like a tire, losing air after a cruel road, and let his shoulders drop. "Watch his pause," Ellen said. "He cues touches when he senses a drop." In the pause after intubation, Rachel spoke fast, not frantic. "Last spring, when Lily fainted at school, we trained Max with a behaviorist. He alerts to pressure dips and arrhythmias. 1 nudge is mild, 3 is danger, 2 for return. He has not been wrong." The manager wrote without noticing she was documenting, because writing anchors belief when faith feels costly and time keeps shrinking. A tech slid a note under the door with a Sharpie scrawl. "Sweater okay for pillowcase." Sarah glanced, nodded once. James cracked the door a hand's width. A nurse tucked the knit near Lily's cheek. Smell bridged policy. Max lowered his head until his forehead lined with the hidden hand. Glass between, breath matched, both holding a rhythm nobody taught them. For the first time all day, Sarah's voice warmed a degree. "We bought minutes. Minutes matter." Ellen turned towards staff and family and asked, "Have you ever trusted an animal's instinct when no one else did?" The words landed gently, a lantern set in a window during a whiteout, not an argument, invitation. Sarah looked from the waveform to the dog's. For a beat, peaks smoothed when Max exhaled, then frayed when he paused. Coincidence? Maybe. Pattern? Maybe. She wasn't superstitious, she was observant. And observation is how medicine finds doors hidden by fear. Max lifted his right paw and tapped the glass 3 times. Measured, deliberate. Rachel stiffened. "Danger cue," she breathed. 30 seconds later, pressure dipped. Not a crash, more like a buckle. Sarah adjusted a beat earlier than protocol might have prompted, because why ignore a clock that could be right? The drop shortened. Recovery climbed soon. The team felt it as much as saw it, and the room loosened half an inch as if the walls believed again. The officer returned wearing a look that said conflict and conscience had wrestled. He moved aside of his own accord. A second guard leaned against the corner and pretended to study a clipboard. The manager spoke on the phone in a tone that asks forgiveness before permission. Someone at the other end didn't hang up. Snow battered the windows. Machines hissed. Staff moved in precise arcs that resembled choreography written by necessity rather than art. Rachel stood straight. James uncurled his fists and found he could feel his fingers again. Ellen set the rosary on the sill and let the beads rest without counting. Inside, Lily's hand twitched toward the pillow. Max kept the cadence, anchoring something invisible and stubborn. Sarah ordered the expanded panel again and a full drug reconciliation. Eyes narrow, voice firm, posture unyielding in the face of numbers that still skated too close to the edge. Minutes passed, measured by breath, alarms and the dog's quiet metronome. The ventilator steadied. Sats, inched. Pressure found a shelf. Not a victory, not yet, but ground to stand on. Sarah didn't mention precedent. She didn't explain the policy. She simply said, "If he cues again, tell me." Rachel nodded. James answered, "Yeah." Ellen breathed in a way that sounded like gratitude with a backbone, the kind that never begs and never gives up. Hope did not arrive with trumpets. It arrived on breath, a thread that refused to snap. The storm outside had made the city small. The storm inside had made the family fear. Between those two fronts stood a girl, a physician who refused to yield, and a dog who knew a truth machines could only measure after the fact. Rising action sometimes looks like holding still until the moment to move appears. When it came, every person in that room felt ready to follow it. The room held steady as hope found a fragile foothold. Emily Park reached the ICU with snow in her hair and a tote full of printouts. Rachel hugged her and stepped aside so she could see the bed. Lily lay intubated, skin washed in stormlight, numbers edging the wrong way while Dr. Sarah Coleman adjusted drips with practiced calm. Max sat outside the glass with Ellen, breathing in a steady pattern that seemed to nudge the wavering line toward normal whenever it drifted. James stood in the doorway like a beam holding the frame. Emily pulled on gloves. "I came as family," she said, "and as an auditor, I traced a set of pharmacy variances. They led to something that should not exist." Sarah glanced up. "Explain." Emily laid stamped screenshots on a tray. Shipments labeled as compassionate adjunct arrive at odd hours through a donor foundation. They're signed by a defunct attending ID and routed through a kiosk account created 3 months ago. The internal code resolves to a project in no registry. She pointed to the header, Project Solace. Rachel gripped the rail. "What is it?" "Unapproved immunologic suppressants blended with a buffer," Emily said. "The logs line up with Lily's worst events. Whoever is running it laundered consent under expanded access without documentation." James swore softly. Ellen's beads stopped moving. Sarah's mouth set. "You're saying someone used my unit to test an unregistered drug on a child." "Someone also used your credential number," Emily said, producing a forged order screen. "This authorization matches nights you were off. 2 vials were recorded as given." She tapped time-stamped. "One preceded yesterday's arrhythmia by 40 minutes. One preceded today's seizure by 22. Sarah faced the charge nurse. "Lock every satellite cabinet. Pull badge logs for 30 days. Call compliance and legal. And while they walk, we treat the patient." Max tapped the door seam with his paw. The pressure dipped, then steadied. Ellen lifted her chin. "He knows what she needs," she said. The nurse manager hesitated. "Policy bars animals from ICU rooms." Emily's voice hardened. "A counterfeit trial just harmed a child. The only intervention that has helped is breathing on the other side of this door. If policy exists to protect patients, it cannot become a fence that lets harm inside and love wait in the snow." Sarah thought of a winter during residency, a boy who never calmed down without his dog, a refusal that ended in silence. She made a choice. "No spectacle," she said. "Cover him and move." James and Emily rolled a laundry cart to the airlock. A nurse lifted the inner door. Max slid into the cart on a whisper and went still under warm sheets. They pushed across the threshold. The manager raised a hand, not to block them but to watch the hall. Inside they eased the cart beside the bed and lifted one corner. Max fell to the floor, tucked neatly by the rail and pressed his muzzle near Lily's shin. His ribs rose and fell. The monitor softened. The ventilator loop rounded. Sarah adjusted one setting, then another, marking times aloud for the record. Rachel touched Lily's knee and whispered that they were there. James let out one long breath, as if stepping off ice onto ground. Security appeared at the glass. The manager met them and said, "Emergency clinical accommodation," in a tone that held. The officer studied the numbers, decided they were an argument, and stayed in the hall. Sarah listened with her stethoscope. Air moved without strain. "If this is a coincidence, I'll take 10 more," she said, and the team allowed itself one quiet exhale. "Tell me the rest," she asked Emily. "The foundation looks legitimate," Emily said. "Glossy site, vague language about hope. Filings route donations to a for-profit lab out of state. That lab's principal lost a contract here for irregularity. Courier logs time deliveries during storms and holidays. Internal orders carry your credential, but the source metadata points to that kiosk account. Who else knows? Sarah asked. On the record, just compliance, Emily. Off the record. I sent a summary to outside counsel and queued a release if I go dark. Max inched closer. Lily's lashes flickered. Rachel bent. Keep breathing with her, she said. And the dog obeyed. The waveform held its new lane. We stop everything not standard, Rachel added. Done, Sarah said. Now we secure evidence. She called for tamper bags, photographed the forged label the nurse had saved, and dictated a timeline. Start a broad panel now that we've removed the variable, and bring a pillowcase. She looked at James. The sweat. James tucked the knit under Lily's cheek. Max scented it and deepened his cadence. The heart rate answered as if waiting for permission. Emily's phone buzzed. Compliance in 20 minutes. Legal assembling. The chief medical officer en route when the streets allowed. She forwarded her packet to a federal contact from a prior audit, and set a delay. If anything happens to me, it goes out, she said. Ellen watched the dog with the satisfaction of dawn breaking after a hard freeze. He has always known her. Have you ever fought for someone you love against all odds? The question did not shout. It rang in the room like a bell. You feel in the ribs. Rules exist for a reason. So does mercy. Tonight Mercy wore fur, and a contraband badge of breath. Sarah nudged the ventilator and lowered a vasopress. Seconds became minutes. The room loosened by degrees. The way a thaw starts at the edges. I will catch heat for this, she said. Good. The alarm should be louder than a button. She faced Emily. In the meeting you lead. In here I do. Agreed. Emily. She slid the folder beneath the mattress. An old trick nurses teach to families guarding rings. She touched the bed frame as if swearing an oath. James texted the shop that he would not return until both storms broke. Rachel told Lily about summer ferries, gulls stealing fries, wind that smells like salt and cedar at once. Down the hall someone taped paper over the animal sign. Temporary clinical exception. See charge. It was messy, brave and right. Security pretended not to read it. A volunteer pushing a cart of cocoa saw the dog, smiled slightly, and kept walking. Sarah checked the screen and allowed herself an inch of relief. We're climbing, she said. Slow is fine. She looked from the window to the bed. Whatever solace promised, we will return what we can. Max settled with paws tucked neat and chin on tile. The waveform held its calmer line. Outside the city remained welded in white. Inside the blizzard felt a step farther away. The conflict had deepened. The twist had teeth. And the child at the center had allies who no longer mistook policy for law or secrecy for science. The dog kept to his post, doing the oldest work, staying, breathing, reminding a frightened body it was not alone. The people around that bed, finally aligned, prepared to pull a hidden trial into light, even if the light came cold through a winter sky. Snow hammered the windows while machines spoke in clipped beeps. Max lay along the bed with his chin near Lily's ankle, ribs expanding in an even tempo. Each inhale matched the ventilator's curve, each exhale smoothed the jagged flutter on the monitor. Sarah watched the waveform settle, hand on the rail, mind weighing adjustments yet pausing because the dog's cadence achieved what medication had not. She lowered a pressor one notch, then another. Oxygen climbed, heart rate drifted toward a lovable lane. Rachel pressed knuckles to her mouth. James planted himself by the door. Ellen stood statue still, beads resting against her sleeve. Emily burst from the stairwell with snow in her hair and a tote of files. She took one look at the screen, then at Max. He's helping, she said. Rachel nodded. More than anything else. Emily opened her laptop and a folder of printed records. Shipments bypassed inventory using a kiosk login tied to a dummy account, she said. The label calls it a compassionate adjunct. The compound is an unapproved immunosuppressant meant to blunt cytokines without review, oversight or legal clearance. Doses reached this unit under forged orders. Sarah's jaw set. Who authorized? The trail runs through finance and compliance to the chief operating office, Emily answered. Signatures look valid until you read metadata. Timestamps jump across time zones. The COO's assistant submitted overrides at 2 in the morning on a holiday with a deactivated badge. The pattern screams orchestration. Rachel gripped the rail. They used my child as a test. James moved in front of the bed. Ellen touched his shoulder like a lighthouse lays a beam on black water. The manager called up the chain. Compliance arrived with legal, then risk, then an escort detail with polite faces that read, "Don't argue." Last came the chief operating officer, coat damp from snow, tablet tucked like a shield. He surveyed the dog, the ventilator and the family. "This is an intensive care wing," he said. "Animals are not permitted. Remove the dog and restore standard procedures immediately." Sarah did not move. "We have stabilization correlated with the dog's presence. I'm adjusting support based on real-time data, and will continue until the patient holds a safe threshold." He lifted the tablet. "Policy is unambiguous. You are exposing the hospital to liability. Security will escort the animal out and place the family in the lounge while we review decisions." James stepped forward. "You will not touch my daughter or her dog," Rachel cut in. "You administered unapproved drugs without consent. We have records, forged entries and courier logs. Remove the dog and you remove the only intervention that helped while you hid a trial behind a donor plaque." The COO's expression hardened. "Be careful with accusation." Stress clouds judgment. Emily raised her packet. "We're past accusations. Here are manifests, billing codes rerouted through a charitable pass-through and emails referencing Project Solace. The formula links to a vendor owned by a former contractor barred after falsifying data. 2 lots went missing during storms. Lily's chart timestamps match those lots to the minute." A murmur rolled through the staff. The officer shifted then stopped, uncertain whose orders held. Max breathed in a deliberate rhythm, nose near the sweater, ears alert to every change. The line steadied in time with his chest. Sarah pointed to the display. "She is responding. Remove him, and that stability vanishes. I will sign any affidavit necessary to justify this accommodation." The COO changed tactics. "You are compromising sterile conditions. Infection risk rises." "Then observe," Sarah said. "He is bathed, nails trimmed, coat clean, paws stationary. A barrier pad is in place. Lines remain secure. Infection control can swab after we keep her alive." Ellen lifted her chin. "We rolled him through a laundry cart because your rules would not bend while a child slipped away. Everyone here knows why he is inside. Pretend you don't and the storm outside will look gentle compared with the one coming for you." He stared at her, then at Emily, then at the number. Security waited for a gesture. None came. The ventilator loop rounded again. The heart rate eased toward a range the team could work with instead of fear. Emily hit the conference phone and called the chief medical officer, speaker set to high. The CMO's voice arrived through stat. "Hold the patient steady. Pull all lots associated with that project. Lock cabinets and secure badges. I'm on my way." The COO bristled. "This conversation belongs in my office, not a court. It belongs beside a girl who almost died because someone treated her like a ledger line." Rachel said, "Stand here and make your own decisions or watch us hand everything to federal investigative." Sarah dictated to the recorder. "Timestamp reduced pressure support tolerate. Oxygenation improved with synchronized canine presence. No arrhythmias in 15 minutes. Proceed with full toxicology and independent confirmation of compound content." Max slid his head onto the mattress. The display smoothed again, subtle yet undeniable. Nurses exchanged brief smiles that looked like relief, learning to breathe. James stroked the dog's neck with a mechanic's gentleness, as if calibrating a delicate tool. Emily stepped closer to the COO, voice low but carried by anger disciplined into purpose. "Your name appears on routing approvals. Your office signed courier, access passes. Your assistant's deactivated badge unlocked the pharmacy when nobody should have been here. Explain that to the parents with a camera recording, or help stop this now." He swallowed. "You have no evidence that any medication harmed her," Sarah answered first. "We have temporal correlation, pharmacologic plausibility and reversal after stopping questionable agents. Lab anomalies show immune suppression far beyond our order. That meets any threshold for immediate cessation and investigation." A compliance officer finally found courage. "Given the CMO's directive, we will halt all non-standard agents, quarantine inventory and preserve the chain of custody. We will also document that the patient stabilized with the animal present." The COO's shoulders sagged a fraction, yet his pride reached for one remaining lever. "The dog still violates policy." Rachel faced him, grief and fury braided into steel. Policy did not hold her hand. Policy did not match her breathing. Look at the numbers. He is medicine. Silence held long enough for the truth to settle. Snow hissed against glass like static. The officer lowered his eyes. The manager wrote an exception and stuck it to the door. The guard stepped back from the threshold and watched the child instead of the rulebook. Sarah eased sedation with a whisper. Lily's lashes trembled. Her fingers twitched toward the sweater. Max inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly, and the monitor followed. The room moved from crisis to tenuous control, that narrow bridge where skilled teams live until ground appears. Emily handed Rachel a sheet charting the path from donor pitch to bedside harm. "We will take this to investigators tonight," she said. The program collapses as soon as light hits it. The COO's expression flickered from defiance to calculation. He eyed the hallway camera, then the family, then the dog. "I will cooperate with the review," he said at last. "Until guidelines clarify, temporary allowance for this animal is granted." James shook his head. "You are not granting anything. You are acknowledging what everyone can see. Have you ever asked yourself, what would you risk to uncover the truth? The answer lives in choices made when a door stands between harm and help, when comfort says wait and duty says move." Max kept time. The ventilator found harmony. Blood pressure was held at numbers that made room for patience. Sarah squeezed Rachel's shoulder. "This gives us a runway," she said. "We are not done, but we are no longer falling." Emily sent her final packet to federal contacts and an outside journal, marked urgent. Ellen picked up the rosary and let the beads slide like rain. James told Lily about ferries where gulls chase foam and engines drum a low promise you can feel in your feet. Rachel kissed her daughter's temple and thanked the animal who taught a room that medicine sometimes wears 4 paws in a stubborn heart. The storm roared. The scandal cracked. The child held. Justice stepped closer, boots crunching across ice, drawn by breath that refused to break and by the witness of people who would not yield, not to secrecy, not to polished statements, not to the small cold comfort of policy. Inside that bright humming room, life chose the louder story and would not be talked out of. Morning rose pale behind frosted glass as the unit shook off a brutal night. Orders changed with first light. Every non-standard agent stopped. Questionable lots sealed, and cabinets locked with dual signatures. Nurses drew fresh panels, labeled tubes in block letters, and wheeled evidence bags away. Lily rested beneath warm air and a knit pillowcase that smelled like home. The ventilator still hummed, but settings had slid downward. The curve on the screen looked less frantic. Sarah rounded with the team, reading numbers in the way a child's fingers tried to curl around a sheet. She lowered support a notch and let the quiet hold. Rachel slept for the first time in days, forehead near Lily's shoulder, hand on the mattress. James took the doorway, posture steady, gaze moving from displays to faces, as if diagnosing an engine by sound. Ellen prayed without words, gratitude visible in the way her back finally eased. Max lay at the foot of the bed, ribs moving in the rhythm that had carried the room. Now his eyelids drooped and his head sagged between breaths, as if the work had reached bone. Sarah knelt and stroked his spine. "You did a good job," she said. He thumped his tail once and resumed the cadence everyone listened for. James checked the pads and found them cool from long stillness. Sarah set a bowl within reach and asked a nurse for broth cooled to safe warmth. Max drank, rested his chin on the blanket, and kept time. Numbers held steady. Respiratory opened brief windows for spontaneous breaths. While Sarah watched the line, Emily arrived with cocoa, a messenger bag, and eyes that had not slept. She hugged Rachel, bumped shoulders with James, kissed Ellen's cheek and scratched the soft spot below Max's ear. "Our hero looks tired," she said. "He gave everything he had," Ellen answered. Compliance confirmed quarantine. Federal investigators were en route. Emily secured a room steps away, so statements would not pull Sarah from the bedside. Rumor moved through metal halls like a current. Volunteers whispered about an ICU dog who steadied a failing heart. A phlebotomist added a shepherd sticker to her badge. Someone taped a paper heart to the door. "Thank you, Guardian." A guard who had argued policy offered coffee runs and stood nearby as if penance required proximity. Between labs, Sarah pulled a chair close. "Max reads more than scent," she murmured. "During residency, I treated a boy with brittle seizures. Rules kept his partner in the hall. Seizures multiplied there. At his feet frequency dropped. We wrote coincidence because we feared ridicule. I still hear his mother asking why Mercy needs permission. She glanced at Mac. Your training bridged the gap we could not cross. Rachel described months after a fainting spell the behaviorist who taught cue touches, drills with pressure changes, and exercises that conditioned measured breathing on command. Ellen added practice sessions where Lily counted while Max matched cadence, and the way she laughed when he huffed like a small engine. Sarah nodded. Evidence arrives as pattern before paper, she said. Today we trust Pat. By midday, spontaneous breaths stretched from 10 seconds to 30 under supervision. Arterial gases improved, inflammatory markers edged down. The nurse manager posted a provisional animal accommodation and reinforced hygiene steps. No one challenged. People scrubbed shoes a little harder and kept their voices low. Max grew heavier with fatigue. A veterinarian from a partner program examined joints, pads, temperature, and hydration, and found strain, not injury. He needs rest, water, food, and reassurance, she said. She left a soft mat and a collapsible dish. Rachel promised a yard and a ridiculous steak when the city thawed. Investigators arrived in parkas over suits, snow melting in their hair. Emily led them to the side room, introduced Sarah, summarized the course, and laid out the chain from donor foundation to pharmacy cabinet with screenshots, timestamps, and courier manifests. Another took statements about late deliveries and badge anomalies. Emily answered with calm precision. The chief medical officer reached the unit after fighting hills and gridlock. He thanked the family for refusing silence, ordered a comprehensive internal review, and placed the ICU under protective directive so evidence could not move without sign-off. The chief operating officer did not appear. Word spread that he had been placed on leave. Evening brought a softening of the weather and of the jaw muscles. Snow thinned to mist. The city took one small breath of its own. Inside, sedation was used to test light responsiveness. Rachel spoke about gulls, fairies, and a summer promise. Lily's fingers curled toward the sweater. Max lifted his head, as if a string had tugged it. The monitor traced a patient's rhythm. Pressure was held without an infusion. Sarah wrote improved. The miracle label bothered Sarah, though she understood why people reached for it. It felt less like magic than two living beings resynchronizing after someone interrupted their music. We will call it care meeting a body in need, Rachel said. Let others say miracle if they do not know the hours behind it. Emily walked the investigators through the final timeline, signed a statement and handed over an encrypted drive. When she emerged, she looked lighter and older at once. They have it, she said. Whatever comes next will not happen in the dark. Ellen squeezed her hand. James thanked her with a nod that acknowledged debt without adding pressure. Night gathered. The ventilator rested on minimal settings while Lily took longer stretches of breath. Then Sarah stared at a city rinsed pale, then turned back with a tired smile. We are on the right slope, she said. The family absorbed it like warmth returning to cold fingers. Max slept at last, unguarded, paws twitching through a dream that probably involved fields, sticks, and a girl running without tubes. Rumors kept circling, but now they came with quieter eyes. Staff paused at the glass to witness the slow return of balance. Someone set a tiny sign that read "Thank you, Max" beneath the room number. Another added a paw print sticker beside the oxygen dial. A volunteer left a child's sketch of a shepherd with a cape. Ellen taped it to the sill and said capes are optional, loyalty is enough. Sarah ended her shift with a thorough note, then sat with the family and finished the residency story. The boy had died, not because his dog failed but because a clinician ignored early cues during a transfer, and hours were lost to argument. She had carried that winter like a stone in her pocket. Last night, she said, I set it down. James nodded. Emily exhaled and called it overdue. When the monitors dimmed for night mode, the room felt less like a battlefield and more like a garden after hail. Damage remained, yet shoots rose. Lily's breath sounded like a promise. Max's sleep approached real rest. The storm moved offshore. The hospital still buzzed with hard news and harder work. Yet a story about a dog who helped a girl breathe traveled across phones and elevators, reminding people why rules exist and whom they serve. People who passed the doorway slowed, not to stare but to take a breath they had been holding since the storm began, as if the steadier rhythm granted them permission to hope again quietly. Hope lingered exactly the size of a chest, lifting on its own, and a tired animal keeping watch at the foot of a bed. Morning settled over the ICU like a truce. Snow thinned to wet mist sliding from the eaves. Plows groaned somewhere down the hill. Machines idled at gentler settings, alarms quiet unless summoned. Rachel smoothed Lily's hair and murmured small promises about pancakes and fairy horns on bright days. James handed out his ruinous coffee with the confidence of a man trying to bribe normal life back into the room. Ellen rubbed Max's ears until his eyes brightened. Sarah Coleman checked the night labs, eased support one more notch and said softly, "Let's see what you can do on your own, kiddo." Lily's breaths lengthened. Sedation was thinned by careful degrees. Sarah leaned close. "Lily, if you hear me, you're safe. Try a breath that belongs only to you." Max lifted his head as if the sentence carried his name. He slid his chin to the blanket near Lily's knee and matched her smallest exhale in slow, patient time. Rachel whispered about cinnamon and Saturday markets. James stood at the doorway like a post, reading hums and glances the way he reads engine noise. Ellen's prayer turned into steady warmth rather than words. The monitor's curve held, a flutter crossed Lily's lashes, finger flecks, throat murmur, then a cough like a door unsticking. Sarah nodded to the respiratory. One smooth motion, a soft suction, and the tube was out. Lily drew a clean, self-owned breath that rewired the day. Rachel laughed and cried in the same sound. James turned aside, wiped an eye, then came back grinning. Max gave a small whine and pressed closer. The screen settled into a lane where people can work from instead of fear. "Hi," Lily rasped. 2 letters felt like sunrise. Water tasted like a new map. Emily entered with the chief medical officer and a federal investigator. She saw Lily awake and let professional caution fall for 3 heartbeats. "There you are," she breathed. The CMO outlined what was already moving. Project Solace suspended. Suspicious lots quarantined. Unapproved authorizations frozen. Pharmacy access rekeyed. Badge logs audited. The COO placed on leave. Independent labs assigned to test seized vials. The investigator secured chain of custody logs and scheduled recorded statements with Emily, pharmacy staff and night shift witnesses. "Families get answers first," the CMO added. No one argued. Rumor outran memo. A story about a shepherd who steadied a child's heart rode elevators and phones. Infection control drafted a protocol before lunch. Barrier pads, disposable booties, designated routes, limited handling, strict sign-offs, pre- and post-swab. A cautious pilot began for medical detection partners with documented training, overseen by attending physicians. Nobody wrote miracle on the forms. Staff called it careful kindness and scrubbed a little harder because the privilege deserved it. Max pushed up and wobbled. Work had cost him. A partner veterinarian examined gums, pads, pulse, joints and hydration. Then smiled. Fatigue, not injury. Rest, brief breaks, gentle food. Reassurance. Rachel coaxed him to the mat, scratched the spot between his shoulders and promised ridiculous treats when storms belonged to memory. He thumped his tail once, sighed and slept with his nose angled toward Lily's pillow. Even sleeping, his ribs kept a calm cadence, other chests unconsciously borrowed. The room breathed with him. By afternoon, Lily could hold a whisper. She asked what happened and listened all the way through. Rachel told her about alarms, forged orders, and how a signature can lie, about how breath can teach a frightened body to listen again. James said Max kept time like a drummer nobody hired, but everybody needed. Ellen said some prayers arrive wearing paws. Sarah described the instant medicine chose observation over reflex, and made space for a living metronome to stand beside policy without apology. Truth landed with relief instead of shock because love had prepared the ground. Emily summarized the road ahead. Agents had secured the inventory and copied the systems. Outside labs would compare vials to manifests. A state board would review ordering histories and credential misuse. The donor foundation that routed money faced scrutiny for deceptive filing. The hospital hired an external firm to run a transparent internal review. Parents of all patients flagged in the logs would be called before any public statement, and what those families heard would be plain. Justice, like healing, would move at human speed, but it was moving. Lily turned toward Max. "You stayed," she whispered. He rose, set one paw on the mattress without disturbing lines, and breathed an easy answer. The monitor agreed. The CMO returned with a small harness bearing the hospital's name and a temporary badge behind clear plastic. "Max Harper, he read, smiling. By provisional authority, you are an honorary therapy partner for this patient's recovery and for designing a future program. Applause slipped out, soft and grateful. A volunteer pinned a tiny heart on the web. Lily pressed a kiss into his fur and closed her eyes with a peacefulness nobody had seen in months. News bloomed beyond the floor. Local sites posted a snow-dusted photo under fluorescent light. Parents shared stories of animals predicting seizures or sugar crash. Clinicians in other cities wrote careful threads about integrating trained companions under rigorous standards. Ethicists discussed mercy beside protocol without sneer. Lawyers walked through consent law. For once, wonder and outrage traveled the same road and didn't shove each other into ditches. Donations for patient advocates arrived with notes that said, "Don't let anyone's child become a ledger line." Evening cleared to stars over wet streets. Lily sipped broth, nibbled toast, slept, woke, smiled and slept again. Max ate, stretched long, shook himself and accepted water like a gentleman. The next respiratory check found lungs open to sound. His focus shifted from vigilant intensity to content watchfulness, work becoming quiet guard duty. The guard who once quoted rules now told anyone who asked that rules work best when they protect people rather than procedures, and then went to fetch cocoa for the night nurse. When visitors thinned, Sarah told the family about the winter she had carried like a stone. Years ago a boy's partner had been kept in the hall. Seizures multiplied there. She had written coincidence in a note and regretted the word ever since. "I promised to step forward next time," she said. "You gave me room to keep that promise." Rachel shook her head. "You stepped first." Sarah smiled. "We stepped together." James called it the kind of teamwork that keeps a lift stable when the weight tries to misbehave. Ellen simply said thank you and meant all of it. Emily laid out a petition for statewide reforms, audited consent, guardrails for expanded access, bans on charitable pass-through bait and switch, quarterly reporting, penalties for forged orders, patient advocates in every review, plain language disclosures, translation fund. James tuned phrasing like a mechanic smoothing a rough idle. Rachel insisted on a hotline staffed by humans, not menus. Ellen asked for chaplain and community links for families far from home. Lily, eyes bright, said she wanted to help design posters reminding staff that listening is care. Emily promised a draft ready for signatures within the week. They vowed to fight, not only for cameras, though cameras would come, but through letters, hearings, councils and nights when attention wanders and pressure needs rebuilding. Emily would bring records and stubborn calm. Sarah would testify about choosing breath over pride. Rachel would teach naming things so fear loses shape. James would fix what he could reach and carry what he could not. Ellen would deliver soup and steadiness. Lily would tell how a dog matched her breath when drugs pushed her toward the edge, and how that steadiness kept space open for truth. The city thawed, buses found routes, ferries sounded low horns across bright water. On a clear afternoon, nurses wheeled Lily to a window where downtown gleamed. Max trotted beside the chair, harness bright, steps measured without swagger. Rachel cracked a vent to admit mild air that smelled of cedar and faint salt. Lily pressed her cheek to the cool glass and said the world looked new and somehow exactly right. Max leaned into her calf and sighed like a promise that intends to keep itself. Justice had begun, not finished. Healing had begun, not finished. But the worst night no longer owned the story. It had been answered by people who refused to yield and by a dog whose steady breath taught a hospital to listen. Word by word, step by step, they were turning fear into policy, grief into action, and a miracle into something shareable, care that sees, rules that bend toward protection, and a bond that refused to break when everything else shook. Tomorrow I will ask more. Tonight they rested, read. 6 months after the blizzard, Seattle shone under a rinsed summer sky. Lily Harper, now 13, adjusted a blue dress in a borrowed conference room while Rachel tucked a curl. James straightened the collar, and Ellen pinned a tiny paw print near her heartbeat. Max sat at attention in a clean harness with a provisional badge, ears forward, tail composed, posture saying ready. Downstairs a banner read Community Accountability Update. Cameras waited, nurses clustered with cautious pride. Volunteers set out water. Sarah Coleman arrived in a blazer that could not hide relief. Emily Park followed with binders stacked like bricks. The chief medical officer shook hands and guided the family to the front row. Max matched Lily's stride, shoulder to knee, calm and alert. Plain words opened the conference. Project Solace, the unregistered scheme that moved vials through a donor foundation and forged credentials, had been dismantled. Inventory was seized and routed to independent labs. The hospital admitted failure, suspended suspicious protocols, rekeyed access, and committed to reforms built with families, clinicians and auditors who refuse euphemism. Consent would be clear, oversight would be live, doors that once opened for ghost badges would not open again. Then came the announcement that rewrote Winter, a medical detection dog program, careful, measurable and narrow. Infection control sets routes, pads, swabs and disposal steps. Training supervisors defined thresholds. Attending physicians wrote the criteria, and supervision. Ethics boards drew boundaries with dignity at the center. Patient advocates received veto power. 4 pilot teams would support seizure prediction, glycemic alerts, and autonomic instability. Findings will be published for public view. Sarah introduced her patient. Applause rose like warm wind across the water. Lily touched the podium, took a self-owned breath, and began. She said fear had taught silence to look polite, while her body begged for help. She described a night when rules were louder than mercy, and a dog kept time until her heart remembered its lane. She thanked the bedside staff for noticing small things while chaos tried to erase them. She forgave the institution without excusing it. She asked the city to keep watch when headlines cooled, and to believe families the first time they speak. She turned toward Max. He lifted his head, and the room softened. Lily said healing arrived as rhythm aligned, science and listening meeting in the space between ribs. She said policy should bend toward protection, never pride. Rachel dabbed her eyes. James looked like the weight had shifted off a jack. Ellen smiled with the quiet satisfaction of dawn after a hard frost. Cameras captured a shepherd leaning toward a girl, who now owned her breath. Emily summarized reforms with tired precision. Courier logs moved into monitored systems. Badge overrides required 2 live signatures. Charitable pass-throughs lost the power to mask purchases. Families could view a secure video of medication dispense. A hotline puts advocates on the first ring. The Attorney General opened a review. The hospital pledged restitution and long memory. Nobody promised speed, they promised honesty. Max's story traveled the city like salt air through open windows. Children mailed drawings of heroic dogs, though Lily kept saying capes were optional. Local news replayed slow-motion hallway walks, Max trotting beside the chair as if counting each wheel's turn. A team sent a jersey with his name and the number 13. A bakery shaped biscuits like fairy. Music students wrote a gentle march and played it by the market while commuters paused to listen. At home, ordinary rituals returned with careful joy. Mornings meant cereal, pills and algebra. Afternoons brought shaded walks where hemlocks laced the path. Evenings ended with tea, a book and the soft click of Max's nails as he shifted to keep Lily inside his compass. He learned a new laugh. He paused at curb cuts, waited for her cadence to match his, then moved with deliberate grace, checking back as if count. Sarah visited on weekends with her retired partner, who demanded belly rubs as payment for years of service. She and Lily planned a fundraiser to seed scholarships so families could train alert pairs. Emily spent late nights helping other hospitals sketch programs shaped by local constraints. Rumor gave way to practice. Paper hearts yielded to laminated badges and checklists. The story began living as protocol instead of a whisper. In August, the hospital hosted a small fair. Booths offered training demos, interpreter sign-ups, consent workshops, and a quiet table where families asked chaplains, social workers, and advocates hard questions in plain language. Lily cut a ribbon on a partner animal lounge with clean mats and She hung the first drawing, a shepherd beside a monitor tracing a calm wave. Max chose a mat near a window and yawned at the cameras, still professional enough to hold the pose until a child reached out a tentative hand. School returned. Lockers Friends asked whether Max could visit the biology department. He did, wearing his harness and an attitude that made teachers breathe easier. Lily explained scent, heart rate entrainment, and cue touches with simple diagrams. She passed around a laminated timeline titled The Day Listening. Questions came about fear and fairness. Answers came about vigilance, consent, humility, and courage that look ordinary while they happen. Dreams took root where fatigue had lived. Lily filled a notebook with sketches of kidneys, lymph nodes, and canine anatomy. On Saturdays she shadowed a neighborhood veterinarian, learning to lift a trembling terrier, wrap a paw with kindness tucked into gauze, and speak to anxious owners without shrinking words. She wrote an essay called The Day a Dog Breathed Me Back, and practiced it as a talk that ended with a line she wanted to keep. Medicine needs instruments, and humility. The second teaches us to hear what the first cannot. Autumn slid in with copper light and a breeze asking for scarves. The new program published its first report: fewer dangerous events during supervised trials, high family satisfaction, 0 infections, and stronger trust across disciplines. A regional network formed and traded data on shared calls where accents braided into one language of care. Ethics panels visited and left with more questions than they brought, which counted as progress. One evening, porch lights winked on, and the neighborhood smelled like cedar and dinner. Lily stood with Max at the corner and looked west toward a sky the color of late peach. She thought about forged orders, a night when a rule forgot its purpose, and the counterweight that held because people refused to yield. She squeezed the leash. Max leaned into her shin, warm and present, an answer made of breath and patience. Have you ever seen love change a life? Share your story. She spoke the sentence for a short video posted with the program launch, inviting neighbors and families to add accounts of animals who stood in the gap. Messages arrived from islands, mountain towns, dense neighborhoods, and wards lit by midnight fluorescents. Dogs predicting seizures, cats waking sleepers before sugar plunged, horses steadying panic while counselors listened. Wonder and rigor walked together instead of arguing. Later, Lily opened a blank page and wrote the first line of a new chapter. I want to become a veterinarian. She pictured a clinic with broad windows and shelves of well-thumbed books, a practice that welcomes partners with the same respect owed to their people. She pictured a hospital wing where trained dogs worked beside monitors, teachers coach nurses, and a hand-painted sign that says "We will listen." Max set his chin on her knee and exhaled a satisfied. She laughed, light and certain, and promised to start with biology, chemistry, volunteer hours, and patience. Before sleep, she and Rachel turned off the lights. James cleaned wrenches on a bench that finally smelled like machine oil instead of feet. Ellen ladled soup into freezer containers for a neighbor and left a note that said call anytime. Lily paused at the refrigerator where a magnet held the paw print pin she had borrowed months ago. She pressed it into her palm, then clipped it to Max's harness. Tomorrow holds ordinary tasks and heavy work. Investigations would crawl, reforms would need tending through meetings nobody televises. But the night belonged to gratitude that refused sentimentality. A dog had kept time until a child found her rhythm, and an institution had learned to treat listening as care. Seattle hummed. The sound threw silver across the dark. The house exhaled. Lily closed her eyes and saw a white coat with her name, a shepherd asleep under a desk, and a door marked with a promise. We will protect, we will learn, we will listen. Max settled on the rug with a long contented sigh, as if to say the work continues and so does the love that makes it possible. Lily's story began in a whiteout and ends in clear light, but the bridge between those edges was built by breath, courage, and a loyal partner who refused to leave. A blizzard turned Seattle into an island. A forged program turned a hospital into a maze. A child's pulse faltered under unapproved drugs. Then a German shepherd pressed his ribs to a rhythm and held it steady until hope could return. Through nights of alarms, a family stood together. A physician chose observation over pride. An auditor followed numbers into truth. And a community learned that compassion is not a luxury, it is a life-saving practice. James brought strength. Rachel carried tenderness. Ellen kept faith alive. Dr. Sarah Coleman defended evidence and mercy. Emily confronted secrecy with receipts, and Max, the steadfast sentinel, matched Lily's breathing until her heart remembered the road home. That is the journey you just walked with us, from sirens to silence, from policy without purpose to rules that protect, from isolation to a chorus of voices lifting one name, Lily, back into a future she now holds with her own hands. We are asking you to keep that future bright. Stand with families who are still waiting for answers. Lift up caregivers who work through storms with sore feet and brave eyes. Celebrate trained partners whose instincts reveal patterns that instruments overlook. Support auditors and advocates who insist that consent means clarity, oversight means action, and charity never disguises danger. Let this channel be a lantern where stories of love, loyalty, and justice gather into a movement strong enough to change halls, forms, and habits. From the first howl in a snowbound lot to the press conference where a 13-year-old spoke without trembling, Max's presence did more than calm a monitor, it united people. It showed what medicine looks like when humility meets skill, when families are treated as teammates, and when ethics sit at the bedside, not only in boardrooms. That is why we created a space for you, so thousands of witnesses can become thousands of helpers. Your comment can comfort a parent who feels invisible at 3 a.m. Your share can reach a nurse who needs proof that gentleness matters. Your subscription can fund new investigations, amplify reform, and bring trained programs to towns that have never seen them. Your voice, combined with others, can make sure no child becomes a ledger line again. We have told you how Lily woke to warm air and sunlight, how Max earned an honorary harness, how the hospital paused questionable protocols, how federal agents secured evidence, and how policy began to bend toward protection. We have shown that justice moves when ordinary people refuse to be quiet. Now the story turns to you. Remember the simple truth revealed in a bright humming room. Love teaches the body to listen, and listening saves lives. Carry that truth into your school, clinic, station, newsroom, kitchen table, sanctuary, and city hall. Tell neighbors that the partnership between trained animals and dedicated clinicians is not magic, it is a careful collaboration worth funding, studying, and expanding. Tell leaders that transparency prevents harm. Tell companies that compassion outranks profit. Tell every child who has felt small in a long corridor that courage can be shared, that breath can be borrowed until their own comes back strong. Let your memory of this journey become a promise. If you have a companion who alerts, steadies, or comforts, lift their name here so others can find courage in your experience. If your family faced a maze of forms and slow answers, write what helped you navigate. If you work inside a system and want to change it from within, add a note about one step you can take tomorrow. These stories do not dilute science. They deepen it by pointing research toward lived realities. Community turns witness into action, and action turns headlines into lasting care. To everyone who walked through the storm with us, thank you. To every nurse who scrubbed a little longer, every tech who labeled one more tube, every guard who chose protection over pride, every investigator who chose daylight over convenience. Your courage wrote lines inside this episode that we will read for years. To Max, who breathed with a child until stability found them both, we offer more than applause, we offer a commitment to honor partners like him with training, access, and respect. To Lily, whose voice now reaches beyond room 312, we offer community, hold us accountable, guide the mission. Join us in building a world where listening is care. Care is rigorous, and rigor includes love. Have you ever witnessed an animal's love change everything? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe to Heroes for Animals for more stories that prove love is the greatest medicine. Add your testimony today so families facing midnight choices can find it before fear swallows their hope. Invite friends who believe kindness is a skill. Send this episode to someone who needs proof that recovery is possible after betrayal. Support ethical programs that train, certify, and supervise detection partners on real units. Encourage hospitals to publish results, track outcomes, and welcome families as collaborators. Imagine what happens when 1,000 clinics adopt lessons learned the hard way. Fewer crashes, quicker interventions, clearer consent, stronger trust. Imagine a map dotted with small paw print icons, each marking a team where science and compassion keep vigil together. Imagine a generation of students inspired by Lily's courage to study medicine, behavior, or policy with an eye toward dignity. Imagine a city where no hallway feels lonely because community stands at every door. If those pictures move you, act now. Subscribe, comment, and share. Volunteer. Write to administrators. Back researchers who measure what kindness makes possible. Become the voice that says gently and firmly that we will not return to the cold comfort of indifference. This is not the end of a video. It is the beginning of a circle. Stand in it with. When the next storm hits, you will be part of a network ready to hold the line with steady breath, clear eyes, and open hands. Remember room 312. Remember the knit pillowcase, the careful notes, the sudden quiet after the tube came out, the laugh that sounded like sunlight striking glass. Remember Max's steady exhale, and the way numbers answered. Remember a family refusing to step back, a doctor who chose humility, an auditor who refused silence, a community that learned how to listen. Carry those memories into action. Subscribe to Heroes for Animals, add your voice below, invite someone new tomorrow, and keep this lantern bright so the next person who needs warmth can find it without knocking twice. We know attention moves fast, but lives change at the speed of steady work. Let this channel pace that work with honest updates, careful training guides, and stories that remind weary helpers why they began. If you ever feel small against systems that seem immovable, return here, breathe with us and choose one brave step. Then another. Together we turn footsteps into paths. Together we make hospitals kinder, research cleaner and homes safer. Together we honor every partner animal, whose devotion keeps human hearts beating tomorrow.